I got this urge to be intricate. Kinda like a curse to burn till the day that I learn, but I don't adjourn till I interject. Some countries in distress. Now tell me why be militant with immigrants, false imprisonment for the innocent. It just don't make much sense.
It's so ambivalent in this game of life.
I'm just another participant, yeah. Lately I've been thinking, I need to pass this message with the right rhymes. I've been living low-key, not like a life in the limelight. I wonder, is the time right? I'm focused on the moment. They still trying to drill these pipelines where sacred water's flowing, and I know that I cannot just let it go. It's a struggle every day, I'm going crazy. Really wish I wasn't troubled. If you're living in some ignorance, you need to pop that bubble. It's a puzzle. If we don't solve it, our country's gonna crumble on the double. Just listen, please. I got the time to stand and talk. I could tell a story about my arrest at Standing Rock. What really makes me mad is peaceful people shop are laughing cops just for occupying space to try to make construction stop. You see these corporations, all they care about is money. And is it funny? If you think it is, and you're a dummy. Think about your family. Reality's a tragedy. I feel the need to change the world before it's a catastrophe. Now, turn 21, but I still see the need to unify. Just understand that this life we live in is do or die. We need to realize that we survived the genocide. I cannot hide the fact that I'm grateful that I've been alive. Innocent people arrested just because of the money invested. It isn't equal in fact, even my freedom was being contested. We fight for the water is precious. Gotta believe this moment is destined. Giving it back to all the oppressors. I think it's time that we teach them a lesson. My ammunition is lyrics written uniquely. You got opinions, I understand this completely. But you need to listen. This truth I'm spitting will lift you into remission of the system we're living in, and it's easy. Why should we listen? They're not respecting the treaties. These people are evil, they pulled me out the Yaneepi. They call it business, it's sacrilegious. I've witnessed the sickness and it's ridiculous. My forgiveness is freaky.
And we will never free ourselves as human people. We will never free ourselves as sexual people. We will never free ourselves until we address the issue of how we live in balance with the earth. Because all of our resistance and all of our struggle is hollow, it's false, it's another one of those oppressors' hypocrisies. If we do not look out for the welfare of the earth first, because I do not care who it is, any child that turns on their mother is living in a terrible, terrible confusion. The earth is our mother. We must take care of the earth. They pollute. This oppressor, this machine that has gone mad and run amok, it is berserk.
Yes, it is berserk, that's why we hit them where it hurts. The only thing they seem to love is money, let's see if it works. Divest, arrest, and organize, I'll see you on the front lines. A multitude of strategies, the only thing that matters. These unimportant corporations, important poison, and placing it in places where they think they can get away with raping Mother Earth. To tell you the truth, it still hurts. Go beyond woke, time to prove your worth, let your spirit work.
Why should we listen? They're not respecting the treaties. These people are evil, they pulled me out the Yaneepi. They call it business, it's sacrilegious. I've witnessed the sickness and it's ridiculous. My forgiveness is freaky. Why should we listen? They're not respecting the treaties. These people are evil, they pulled me out the Yaneepi. Why should we listen? They're not respecting the treaties. These people are evil, they pulled me out the Yaneepi.
Reality is the earth can no longer take this attack. We can no longer allow this thing to continue where it's polluting the air. It's polluting the water. It's polluting our food. They pollute the air, they pollute the water, they pollute our food, they pollute our minds. They put us out of balance. They have made us be insecure with ourselves.
Hi everybody, this is Ohneganos Let's Talk Water, episode 1 of season 2, and we are recording this one because we had a little bit of technical difficulties. So I'm your host, Makasa Looking Horse, and this is Ohneganos Let's Talk Water. So for our new season, we're going to be coming up with all new changes, which we want to show you today, but sadly it didn't actually work out the way we want to plan. So we're working it on all day and all week, so it should be up and running smoothly by next week. And we want to thank Summer and Alex so much for all of their efforts. They're right here in front of me, and you guys won't be able to see them, but we've been working all day on it. And I also wanted to feature some of our guest hosts featuring some of our guest hosts that we're going to be highlighting. So we have, sorry. So far we uploaded 2 highlights from our season 1, like Quana Chasing Horse, who is, we want to congratulate Quana because she's been featured in Teen Vogue. So make sure to check out her article. Also, we are looking forward to more highlights this season from our guest speakers like we have today, like Mike and Whitlow. During today's show, we're going to have a science minute with some troubling findings about our Six Nations water. And our youth guest would technically be me because we have worked together about Nestlé. And our community guest is Rod Whitlow, and another guest that we have is Mike Balkwill from Wellington Water Watchers. Okay, so our important matters we're going to be celebrating is the win with Nestlé leaving Canada. It's just an important matter, and our clan mothers like Norma and Mary will be on next week, so stay tuned for that. They want restitution from Nestlé. And in the name of truth and reconciliation, Nestlé will give the water extraction plant to the community for clean water. So that's what they want. Okay, so our first guest that we're going to have is Mike Balkwill, and I met him through Wellington Water Watchers, and they were a huge support for supporting me and supporting the Six Nations community sending Nestlé the cease and desist letter, but also making sure that Nestlé doesn't take our waters anymore within Canada. So here is Mike Balkwill. I'll introduce him a little bit. So he is a campaign manager for Wellington Water Watchers. He works to protect water and fight for water justice. He's been really involved with the campaign against Nestlé. He also helped us develop a billboard in support of our show here of Ohneganos Let's Talk Water and Fight Against Nestlé. Right near the Nestlé plant. So thank you so much, Mike, for all of your hard efforts in supporting Indigenous voices and trying to protect all of our waters.
Thank you, Makasa. I'm very happy to be with you tonight.
Thank you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got involved with Wellington Water Watchers?
Well, that's an interesting story, actually, Makasa. I've worked for my whole career as a community organizer and campaign organizer, and I've never really thought of myself as an environmentalist. And maybe 10 or 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, because Mike Harris was the premier, I was working with a group of parents a group of families, who wanted to stop the amalgamation of Petroleum Hospital to Mississauga and Humber and Toronto. And the government wanted to move a ward of people who require medical care 24 hours across the city. And that would have been disruptive to all the family who supported them, plus it would have endangered the lives of people who were being transferred. So anyway, I met Rob Case and his wife, Erin, during that campaign 15 years ago. And then about 6 years ago, I was flying back from Vancouver. I hadn't seen Rob since then. We happened to be sitting on the plane next to each other. And he told me about Nestlé. And I said, well, if I can ever help out, give me a call. Mm-hmm. So 5 years ago, they gave me a call, and I did just when they were announcing the Middlebrook Well proposal. And I did a kind of a new campaign plan with them. And then they said, well, can we hire you? I said, yes, you can. And I've been there for 5 years.
Wow, what kind of things have you done so far that you think that, well, Nestlé has left Canada. Do you want to talk a little bit about those? facts?
Sure. So just to kind of update the situation, so Nestlé surprised us all in July by saying they were selling off their North American operations. And then they announced at the same time in July that they were going to sell their Canadian operations to a company called Ice River Springs. So they made that announcement in July, and the proposed sale had to be reviewed by the federal government, by the Competition Bureau. And interestingly, it didn't get what Nestlé says is it wasn't reviewed within their timeline, so the deal with Ice River fell through. And now what's going to happen is Nestlé's proposing to sell all of their North American operations to one other company. I think it's very interesting what you were saying at the top of this show about the grandmothers wanting restitution and wanting Nestlé to give the plant to Six Nations. I think that's a really interesting idea. And while their business is kind of in limbo while they think about selling it, now's a really good time to make that suggestion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what the grandmothers want is they want justice for the water that they have taken.
Yep.
And they're very fierce on their decisions, and I think that you met them, so you kind of know.
I did meet them. They are fierce. I was sitting. If you remember the day of that last demonstration, everybody was on the bus, but somebody had got lost, and so we had to wait while they found the person who had wandered off. And I was standing in the bus, and one of the grandmothers, I'm not sure which one, said to me, "It's very curious. Why do you call yourself water watchers? Why aren't you water doers?"
Oh my gosh.
Which I thought was and she smiled when she said it. I thought it was funny but important what she said.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Did you take what she said? And wanted to do a lot?
Well, I took what she said and I went back to other people in our organization and I said, water watching is a really curious way of talking about what we do. We should think about, I think we are people who do things, but we should think about changing that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely when it comes to when you first hear Wellington Water Watchers, right? So what advice can you give young people who may not have a platform and who want to get involved into Wellington Water Watchers?
Well, I think there's two things there. I think, the question of how do young people get involved is a really interesting question. And I think lots of people find their way to being active through their families, through their family connections. Mm. The adults or the aunts and uncles or the cousins who are around them are doing something. And the young people say, why are you doing that? Or that looks interesting, or that looks important, or I want to do that too. So, first of all, I think that's important. And secondly, young people still have a strong sense of justice and fairness. I think as you get older, that can be kind of talked out of you, or you can be made to feel like you shouldn't, the world is too complex. But when you're young, it's very clear. It's very clear what injustice is. And I think it's really important for young people to hold on to that and have confidence in that and to act when they see injustice and stand up in whatever way they can, whatever's around them, and to do it with others. There's another saying, and you probably have heard this saying, and which is that for social change to happen, you need the wisdom of the elders and the energy of the youth. Mm-hmm. You really need them both, because elders know things. And young people don't know everything yet, but they know things have to change and they have the energy to make change. So I think that's a really important relationship, a really important partnership. I'm repeating myself, the wisdom of the elders and the energy of the youth. And the other thing is, and I say this as an older person myself, life has changed a lot since I was young. I don't know what it's like to be young anymore, and how it is for young people today. So as an older person, I really need to listen to how the reality is of young people today and
Mm-hmm.
how things happen and learn from them as well. So I think it's a two-way street.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about the just the facts, some facts that Nestle, like they have been taking 3.6 million liters of aquifer water per day. Why you? I have been to a few talks about Nestle and what they have done in different parts of the world, and how they have taken a lot of water and they're very tricky, and why are we really focused on Nestle?
Yeah, these are good questions, Makasha. They are very tricky. And saying they're very tricky is really being very nice to them. Their activity borders on criminal and is criminal in some places. So in here in Ontario, in Wellington County, they've had permits to take, 3.6 million liters of water a day, which is an awful lot of water, in Aberfoyle and another million and something up in Hillsburg. And they're taking water out of the aquifer and they're bottling it, kind of holding it hostage, and then they're transporting it out of the watershed and it never comes back. And they say that there's no impact from that. But the science tells us that it can take more than a person's lifetime for an aquifer to recharge. And that just because they can't measure the impact yet doesn't mean that there's not an impact that's going to come.
Yeah.
And part of what then, well, that makes common sense to you and me. Part of what Nestle does is they try and confuse the science. They don't really want to prove that they're right. They just want to raise doubt about people who question what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And they make up statistics. When you talk about being tricky, Nestle will say they take less than 1% of the water that are issued for permits to take water. So I want to say something a little bit technical, and then I want to say something that's, a little more popular. And the technical thing is, permits to take water in Ontario are issued for all large-scale water taking, but they include, for example, the water that goes through hydroelectric dams. So to say you're taking 1% of the water that's covered by water permits in Ontario, it's not a good comparison. It should be, what's the amount of drinking water that they're taking, for example. And here's the maybe more popular way to say it. If there was a vampire in your town, and the vampire said, I'm only taking 1% of the blood of people in all of this community, you'd say, well, I don't know, that doesn't sound too bad. But if that 1% turned out to be 10 liters from one person, it would mean an awful lot to that one person that the vampire is taking that much blood from them. And really, Nestle's a vampire. And they're taking a lot more water, and it has a much bigger impact than they'll admit to.
Yeah, I think that a lot of Indigenous people can definitely believe that these companies lie through their teeth, and they try to go through every kind of loophole that they possibly can to make money. And it's extremely sad, and I think that we can see similarities with all of the companies, whether it comes to oil or water, any kind of necessity that people need. And it's frightening that, like, some kind of important person from Nestle said that water is not a human right, and that it needs to be bottled and bought. And that is completely insane, because we can't live without water. And it's truly mind-boggling, because we literally cannot live without water, and water should be free for everybody, and it should be clean. All of our water bodies should be clean and should be respected, but the reality is that it's not. And I think we can definitely see that with here in Six Nations, with especially our Grand River, because our Grand River, to think that our Grand River was fresh and we could drink out of it at one point is insane to think about, especially like right now, to believe that our river was once clean and that we could drink out of any kind of water body around us. And since those ones are now contaminated and we haven't respected that water body like we should have, and now the only clean water source that we do have is our aquifers, and we still have to pay attention to even the waters that we can't see, and that's definitely like our aquifer. And that's why I push so hard, because we can't see it, and who can tell us how much water is really there and where they are, how much water there is, and how much Nestlé took exactly. And like, we will never get that water back. And
Absolutely right.
And it's completely insane that we can't get that water back. Like, and we probably have drank that water and bought it at the store, and we shouldn't have been able to do that. Or we shouldn't have been able to do that, but like, that shouldn't be an option, that the water that was free to us, company made millions and millions and millions of money off of it and sold it back to us. And our community of Six Nations doesn't even have clean drinking water to begin with. So that's why I think our grandmothers are so fierce about this decision to Nestlé and pursuing Nestlé, and the same reason that I wanted to do something about it. And so I put up that protest, and I asked the community what they wanted to do, and I did an awareness, because a lot of people didn't even know that this was happening. It was really like you guys who I found out that this was happening. And how I found out that Nestlé was taking our water, and through the water project, I also found out, and nobody knew that this was happening at all. Like, no clue, never heard about it. Was definitely not on anybody's radar. But I think that I made a difference in that, and that now that our community knows not to buy Nestlé, and knows like what they have done, and even has a little bit more knowledge on what an aquifer is, and just the facts that that the world has only 2% of fresh water, like in the entire world. So eventually water is going to be more important than oil, because we can definitely not live without water at all. And we can live without oil. Like, it's possible, but it's impossible to live without water. And that's why it's so important to protect our waters, because we seriously cannot live without it. We seriously, like, can't drink sewage. And that's like what's going into our waters right now. And that's why we have to protect our aquifer, because it's really our only clean water body source that we have left, and our springs and stuff. So thank you so much for all of your work to continue to protect our waters, because I think you heard everything that I was saying before, but it's definitely important for our viewers right now who will watch this video, for our viewers to know that that we don't have, that only our world only has 2% of fresh water, and we need to work together, work with Wellington Water Watchers, and build these connections, and it's definitely really important what you guys did in amplifying my voice as an Indigenous woman coming from Six Nations. I think those relationships with allies are really important and are a great example of I can tell other allies on what to do by what you guys did for me, which is really important.
Those are very kind words, Nakasha, and I appreciate them, and we appreciate them. And I think being allies is a two-way street. I'm glad you feel that we amplified your voice and supported you and supporting us. It works both ways. So, and I would say as well that just to be clear that the grandmother's demand makes a lot of sense to me, and the Wellington Water Watchers will support that and do anything we can to support you and the grandmothers in getting Nestlé to give that land and give that complex to Six Nations.
Yeah. I think we're all for that. It's just the work has to go into it.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think I'm not too sure if I did go over what Six Nations has done or the actions that I have did. So maybe I'll just tell a little bit about the background. Sure. And so when I first started working for Ohneganos Let's Talk Water, we did and when I first started so when I first started Ohneganos Let's Talk Water, not Let's Talk Water, Ohneganos Water is Life, I found out that Nestlé was taking 3.6 million liters out of our aquifer. So that was, like I said, at the same time, I've been doing research on Six Nations water quality, and that 90% of Six Nations is not hooked up to the water treatment plant, which is treated water and free water that comes from your taps. So what the 90% of our community has to do is buy water and put it into a cistern and hook it up to their house, which they have to pay for all of the infrastructure, and that is a lot of money when you're building a house. So it could cost thousands and thousands of dollars for your house to go up, and we have to pay, no matter what, we have to pay for our house, we have to pay for our land, we have to pay for the infrastructure, the hydro poles, the culvert to put your laneway in, the plumbing, and that's including the water tank and getting water trucked to your house, and filling it up your water tank. And if you don't have enough money, and that could be around $80 per week, that is really stressful on a low-income household or a household that has a lot of kids and a lot of families living in one household. You can run out of water quick, and that can be really dangerous if you have young ones. If it's in the summertime and you don't have any water and you can't afford to bring water, then you go without water. And there's a lot of households that do not have any kind of access to their water, and that's a few households that I know, a lot of households that still to this day do not have running water, and that's because they are unable to afford the infrastructure that goes into it, and also afford water being trucked in every so week, because it's a big burden, and so they have to use jugs, and it's a huge burden when a family doesn't have access to clean water, because they're unable to shower their kids, or they're unable to, if you're a single mother, there's a story that she had complications because with there's a single mother who had a family that she had to take care of, and she was carrying a child, and she had complications after she carried 2 big water jugs into the house because there's no one else to do it. And so it's huge. It's a huge burden, and our people shouldn't have to go through that when there's cities around us like Hamilton, Toronto, and Caledonia. And it's completely because we are underfunded by the government, and it's unfair that our surrounding cities and our next door neighbors are able to have water and infrastructure and funding, and it's not a question for our surrounding cities, but it's a huge problem when Indigenous people, like here in Six Nations, need clean drinking water. And it's a fact. Like, it's most I'm going to say a lot of, I don't want to say all, but most Indigenous communities in Canada are terribly not treated like we should be, and are not treated like how our cities are treated. And that's just it should be completely unacceptable, because we should have the same rights, and we should have the same treatment, and we should have the same funding. And it's just it's like, where is Environment Canada? Where is all of these resources that Canada has? And we know that Canada has the money, and we know that it's their choice, it's their conscious decision not to fund our First Nations communities for basic human rights, like proper housing, like clean drinking water, and all of these problems. So it's definitely maddening as a youth, I think, to know these facts and to try to not get mad at them every day. So I think that I think that definitely I think that affects our youth and our mental health, because we know these facts, and it affects our everyday life, because then we're spending our whole life trying to fix it, and we don't have the leisure to do something that with our lives that like we enjoy. Like, every Canadian gets to have that option to do something that they want to do. We have to do something that we have to do for our community. So it's definitely a burden for Indigenous youth, and I feel for them. So I think that we can transition into our next guest, which is Rod Whitlow, and he's a former senior environmental advisory for Chiefs of Ontario, and he worked with water in the Great Lakes region for 30 years. So he has a lot of knowledge into what I was just talking about, and he has worked really hard for our environment and our water. So here's Rod Whitlow. You can introduce yourself, turn your camera on maybe. Are you there?
Good evening, everyone. I'm just trying to adjust the screen here, but because I have so much things that I want to say, I've got all these papers spread out. So maybe for the first part here, I'll just leave it on so that you're not looking at the back of papers that I wanted to read. I'll just leave it on my post-it picture on there. But I wanted to thank Makasa and the Global Water Futures team for letting me contribute to this important discussion. It's been a better part of my career. I'm now at the end probably of my working career, and so I've got a lot to share, and I'm really happy that we have a youth campaign and youth leadership continuing to move forward with this important issue of water security and water justice. So I don't know, Makasha, have you had some initial questions that you want me to focus on, or if I could just...
Maybe just tell us a little bit of your involvement in water work and advocacy.
Sure. Okay, so back in 1989 and 1990 and 1991, fresh out of university, I finished my Bachelor of Science in Biology from the University of Guelph, and I was hired right away in our home community here at Six Nations as a fisheries biologist, freshwater fisheries biologist, and we undertook a provincial designed aquatic habitat assessment of the community watershed. So for the most part, it was the Boston Mackenzie creeks, but there were some other smaller tributaries of the Grand River as well. And it involved doing an aquatic assessment, including biological inventory of the fish. And there was also a rehabilitation program, which was kind of short-lived. It was funded through summer programs. At that time, they had a program called the Environmental Youth Corps. So we had a team of youth and students interested in environment that were helping us in the summers to complete this assessment. So that, though some of the baseline data, I guess, is still of interest to the community in current settings and the work that Global Water Futures projects are looking at Boston Mackenzie Creek and the community watershed as a whole. So I have some information that hopefully I can share with the team there, so they can do some kind of comparative analysis. We did walk the entire length of the Boston Mackenzie Creek, and I understand in talking with some of the other folks that are doing some field work now, that the situation has probably got a little bit worse than it was back in the beginning of the early 90s. At that time, I don't recall that we've had a whole lot of incidents of beaver dams, but they're a major problem right now in terms of backing up the water and localized flooding and the buildup of nutrients behind the beaver dams and that type of thing. So I have a colleague that was doing some research on that, so I'm hoping I can contribute to the continuation of that research. So that just around the beginning of 1990, the Six Nations community encountered a water crisis. So just as I was working on the fisheries project, there was a water crisis. It was in the upper reaches of the Grand River. I think it was a company called Uniroyal. There was a contaminant that they found in the raw water going into the water treatment plant at Chiefswood Park. It was called NDMA, and I guess the international standards for acceptable levels of that chemical in water was 14 parts per trillion, and it was something like 260 parts per trillion. So wow. What it did is it triggered a major political response. I remember the headlines. That's why what I'm looking through now is just through some of the newspaper articles that we had put in a scrapbook from the 1990s. And the headlines from the Brantford Expositor said, Six Nations residents warned not to bathe. Don't drink the water. They were trying to bring in truck water to meet the demand for those people on the distribution system. At that time, it was just a small number of households because the water treatment plant was at the Chiefswood Park, and then we had a pumping station. So that's 30 years ago now. So in 1990, when we had this water crisis, and there's been a lot of water crisis that the community has faced and endured, and that's one of the key things that really kept me motivated in the work the career path that I chose, is because of the fact that water is important, and we know we have to keep our guard up, and it's going to take a multi-pronged approach to make sure that we have clean, safe drinking water for now and for the future generations. So after I finished that fisheries project, the next project I worked on was called The Effects on Aboriginals from the Great Lakes Environment. And it was a project funded under Canada's Green Plan. And we had a headquarters in Ottawa at the Assembly of First Nations, and we had regional offices throughout the province of Ontario. So I was in the Southwest region, and we did a number of environmental health research initiatives. As part of that study included collecting fish and wild game and having those analyzed for levels of contaminants. We did actually collect water, although it was a concern because of the fact that a lot of communities were concerned about the impacts that contaminants in water were having on their human health. So, but there were some follow-up programs of the Eagle Project that came about after 1997. In our community at Six Nations participated in one of them. It was called the First Nations Food and Nutrition Environmental Study. So they wrapped up, and they had I understand they had a closing conference last year to look at the communities and the results that they collected. So they did collect water samples. So I've just reviewed the results from that study, and there's now a new study that's funded by the federal government pertaining to children's health. So it's a continuation. So if you kind of just look at the evolution of that research, it started with the Eagle Project, and then it morphed into the First Nations Food and Nutrition Environmental Study, and now there's a focus on children's health. So I won't get too much into the weeds with the Eagle Project, but then I continued my work with the Chiefs of Ontario and the Assembly of First Nations, Ontario First Nations Tech Services. I was a public servant both for Environment Canada and the Provincial Ministry of the Environment, and now I'm trying to work towards some graduate research to move on towards my my master's degree. So.
Wow, nice.
I'll leave it at that.
That should be easy for you too, since you're so smart and have lots of experience. But that's crazy. A lot of people don't know those things, and I think it's important that you're saying them for sure. And we should have, I don't know, I think that I just think it's important that we're here and you're sharing that. And do you have any anything else that you think that we should hear, that the community should know about?
Yeah, there's a few things. So I'm continuing my political advocacy or what have you. I refer to myself as a water warrior, but I know I'm not the only one. And it's like I say, it's going to take a multi-pronged approach. We're gonna need the youth because they get a lot of traction with these environment campaigns, and we're going to need the men and the women's council and everyone to come on board with this. I mean, for me, having worked for as a public servant for the federal and provincial governments, I saw the alarm bells way long time ago. So, and you know, we have this art. I was just looking at Article 61 of the Great Law of Peace, and it says if there's any calamity that threatens our happiness as a people, we're supposed to sound the alarm. So I know that alarm has been sounded for many decades, and I don't think that we can take a moment to pause or consider. We have to keep going. And the one picture that I was going to put up on the screen was a picture of the late grandmother Josephine Mondam, and I got the chance to work with her quite a bit through my work at Environment Canada and the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, and all the wonderful work that the Women's Water Council did in raising awareness about water. And she walked around the entire Great Lakes and to the Mississippi and the St. Lawrence and to the oceans. And so she was a real inspiration. And you know, I know that there's folks out there that are looking at ways to honor her, her legacy and her great work. And so I was just thinking to myself that I know her birthday was around February 21st, and she passed, I think, just one day after her birthday. And that's the same time as what the province of Ontario has Family Day. So I was just thinking, I don't know if anyone's given this much thought, but there should be some effort to try to recognize her hard work and her dedication and her legacy around that time of the year. So I put that out there. The other thing that I feel is very important is, you know, like I say, it's a multi-pronged approach. We have land defenders right now that are being criminalized for doing peaceful protests. And so we've collectively across the country, Indigenous people have to look at all ways to keep moving forward with recognition of our rights and our water rights. So I've taken on a personal campaign, a letter writing campaign, nice. And I've got quite a few responses back from the current provincial minister of the environment, Jeff Urich. They're a little bit disappointing, mind you. So it just indicates that we have a lot more work ahead of us. I was
So
working at the Chiefs. Sorry, go
what
ahead.
do you mean the letter writing? So you have a campaign and you want people to write letters to one person?
Yeah. So the approach that I'm taking is because I have a background in science, and then they had this the province set up this external water quantity working group, and there were water bottle companies sitting on there and other industry people sitting on there, and they had a few First Nations representatives and Métis representatives on there, but it was very exclusive, so you can't really get information. And then it's so infuriating when you hear the premier and maybe sometimes the prime minister on TV saying, well, we've talked to the national organization, the Assembly First Nations, or we talked to the Chiefs of Ontario. And nothing against those organizations, because I work for both of them and I have colleagues and great respect for the work that they do as secretariats. But it's so infuriating when you hear them say, well, they just think it's like a check mark. Okay, we've talked to the Chiefs of Ontario, check mark. Well, Six Nations is not even legally affiliated with that organization. It's comprised of Grand Chiefs of 4 PTOs. Six Nations, New Credit, and Gull Bay are independent. So to hear that Ministry of the Environment and the Premier consistently say, "Oh, we've talked to the First Nations," every single letter I get back, when they didn't. So I've been pushing hard since I left the Ministry of the Environment back in 2014 to say, okay, well, can you please come to Six Nations and I'll help arrange for the coordination of it. You need to talk to the community at large about what you're planning to do.
Yeah.
Whether you're trying to lift this moratorium on commercial water taking, or if you're going to increase the fee from $3.71 to $503.71. So you look at Nestlé, if they charge $1, just let's be conservative, $1 for every 1 liter bottle of water they sell, technically they could be making $3.6 million a day. So you go back to the province and you talk to the minister and that director and the water director, and they say, well, we estimate that it's between $600,000 and $800,000 that we're going to be bringing in for permit fees just from Nestlé alone. So I've been pushing and saying, okay, that's you shouldn't be selling water. You should be commodifying. And by the way, there is a Chiefs and Assembly resolution from 2018, with a moratorium for commercial water bottle companies taking water from traditional lands. And it's like I said, it was passed by the Chiefs and Assembly. So 133 chiefs passed that motion, but it doesn't get much traction or much attention. So if anything, I've learned from working with so many wonderful people over the years, and elders and the Women Council as well. And I have a lot of women peers and mentors. Is that we can't give up the fight, because if the more we give them, you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And Josephine would always remind us that you can't commodify it. So there's other jurisdictions around the world where they say the settler governments say they own the water, they make the decision. So what's happening now? Doug Ford seems to think that he has the right to all the water, and that he can now delegate that authority and those decisions to the municipalities. So what we need to do is remind our friends and our colleagues in other municipalities that on June 2nd, 2022, it's not that far away, there's going to be a provincial election. And the Doug Ford government right now is trying to streamline environmental assessments in the name of development. So whether it's the Ring of Fire, or they have some interest in other forestry related mineral exploration. So there's a campaign right now from the Chiefs and Assembly to actually sue the government of Ontario over that decision. So that government's not flinching one bit. So like I say, if you want to help in our collective struggle in humanity to not commodify the water and let it to be exported, you can make a difference when you go to the polls to vote for your. So if MPP Jeff Yurk is in Elgin, Middlesex, London, then you can help the cause by writing a letter to him. So that's what I've been doing. So I'm trying to encourage letter writing. And Will Boma is our MPP for Brantford. I've written to him quite a few times as well. Again, they say, oh, put an application into the Freedom of Information. We'll get back to you. Well, they don't get back to you through that process. They come up with every excuse that you can think of. So it's just so infuriating. But again, like I say, as long as I live, I'm not giving up on this campaign. It's been instilled in me. I grew up in a household in the Haldeman tract where we didn't have indoor plumbing. We had to go to my grandmother's quite a few miles away to get water. Our well was contaminated. And she had one of those old wells where you had to prime the pump, hand pump it. So, and I actually like that idea. To have that plumbing outdoor and using the outhouse, and you had to
because that's definitely touches on our issue with the Grand River too, because there's so many sewage pipes that are going into it. So we definitely need to go back to that, because if not, we're still contaminating our water. Yeah.
Well, I want to congratulate you, Makasa, because like I say, every time I go someplace, they say, well, what are you guys doing at Six Nations? And the good work that you did in getting the Confederacy to issue the cease and desist, and the work that the youth campaign is doing, and the women. Like I say, it's going to take a multi-pronged approach to get any traction. And if they don't hear from us, they think there's nothing. They'll post something on the Environmental Bill of Rights, and they say, well, we didn't hear anything from Six Nations. We talked to Rosa and Archibald. Six Nations, they didn't even know we exist. They pretend that we don't exist, and we pretend that we don't have any issues.
So your message is to vote, is to write letters and push and watch what the government's doing, because they're making a lot of decisions on our behalf.
Yes.
Because we're not saying anything.
Exactly.
So we need to write those letters, and maybe you can send us something so that we can post it, more information on of our
so like the other thing I've been doing is, like I said, is trying to do a campaign. So the last letter that I wrote to Minister Jeff Urick, what I did is I copied a whole pile of folks. I copied the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Water Alliance, Amanda Classing, who I worked with, Human Rights Watch. She did a study here at Six Nations. I copied a couple of the journalists. I've copied The Guardian, the Toronto Star, Maud Barlow at the Council of Canadians, and Matt Damon. Matt Damon has a thing that he's trying to get water to third world countries, but we don't have the water. Like you said,
we're definitely
and don't even have running water.
Third world country, conditions when we shouldn't be. How did you meet Mike?
I think I was invited to a Flint, Michigan meeting. So as you know, they've been dealing with Nestlé, and they had lead in their water, and it took them the better part of a decade to get their governor and their politicians to make sure that they had access to clean, affordable water. So they're at a different place now in terms of I think that's where I met Wellington Water Watchers. They had some information booths at that event. And then I met with some folks from Council of Canadians, and I realized that there's a lot of good people at the grassroots level keeping the pressure on those political bodies that are making decisions about water. And so that's how I met Mike and the Wellington Water Watchers.
Mm-hmm. And I think that the Wellington Water Watchers are also trying to get letters and do the same thing. And is that true, Mike? You have put efforts into doing the similar approach of writing letters to stop water bottling?
Yeah, we have been doing letter writing too. And you probably know that in 2016, the Liberal government imposed a moratorium on new permits for water bottling, which effectively stopped the Middlebrook well in central Wellington. And that they continued, that moratorium has been renewed three times now, actually, by the Ford government, which is surprising because the Ford government is friends of corporations. So you'd think they would want it to let that go ahead. But it's been the constant political pressure from everybody, from there's lots of allies who are involved in this, and letter writing and demonstrations and rallies and phone calls. And the Liberals, the Conservatives, I think they're very nervous about doing the wrong thing about water. I think they know ever since Walkerton and the contamination of the drinking water there, that they're vulnerable on the water issue. So I think all the things that we've been doing, and by we I mean all of us, you, the Council of Canadians, Environmental Defence, has put the pressure on, and we've actually kept the issue in the public eye. I mean, governments hope that the people will forget about these things and then they can move on. Mm-hmm. And, that hasn't happened. Mm-hmm. All of us together are keeping it on the front burner and in the public eye, and that's very important.
Yeah.
Even the work you're doing right now, this podcast, for example, is just another way of doing that. It's another way of keeping the issue alive and people talking about it. The billboards are a way to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's definitely the goal here with this podcast, with many issues to keep them all alive. And if we can help and put your information with both of your efforts and how we can help, how can our viewers help, you can send something, because this one is a recording, so we can put that information out at the same time that we put the recording out.
Terrific.
And yeah, just let us know.
We'll do that.
What we can do.
We'll do that.
Because I think we have a lot of viewers who can put some numbers in. That's what we need.
Good.
Yeah. So, do you guys have any questions for each other?
Well, Rod, I want to know if that's the Christmas tree behind you. That's what I want to know.
I celebrate Christmas year round. Why not?
Why not? I want to know if your family and friends bring you gifts year round. That's what I want to know.
No, I was trying to be symbolic here. Say it's a representative of the Tree of Peace, and I've got the eagle on the top that my uncle made when he was younger. And so, yeah, it's more of a patio ornament. The ones where you're sitting on the patio and you've got tree lights around the trees. That's what it's the concept. It doesn't have decorations.
Right.
It's only a Christmas tree when Christmas comes around. You take the eagle down and you put a star up there.
No, the eagle stays up.
Put a star on top of the eagle.
Yeah.
That's when you know it's Christmas. Yeah. So, I don't think I have do you guys have any words of wisdom?
I'll let Rod go first. He's wiser than I am.
No, I just say that we have to continue these types of dialogues and these types of discussions, and there is a leadership role for the youth, and so I'm so very proud of all the work that you've done, Makasa, and
thank you.
So just keep up the good work, and hopefully we'll get some traction collectively.
Yeah.
And I want to do a shout out to you, Makasa, because you recorded. Oh, he's trying to phone me. I don't know if you can hear that. So I want to do a shout out to you, Makasa, because somebody really wants to talk to me. Is that ringing coming through on the computer?
No, it's okay.
Oh, good. Okay, I'll ignore it next time. So, Makasa, the youth climate strike movement in Switzerland just had an occupation during Climate Strike Week in Switzerland, and they were wanting to force the federal parliament to pay attention to climate change. And the police came to break up their occupation. And so Franklin Frederick, who's a Brazilian who's in Switzerland now, and who you both met, sent an urgent request for video messages in solidarity with the youth to inspire them, and also to let the Swiss people know that people in other countries were watching and paying attention. And you made a recording, and it was excellent. and they really appreciated it. I was talking to Franklin just today, and he was saying it was really meaningful to the young people to have a message from you as another young person, supporting them, and that we had plans in March, Rod and I and others, to go to Switzerland and be part of a conference there to bring attention to Nestlé's behavior in North America, South America, Africa, Europe. And of course, that was canceled by the pandemic. But they were very pleased to get your message and look forward to life after the pandemic, and to invite you and Rod and others to come to Switzerland and present and show solidarity. So that's something to look forward to.
Yes.
But thank you very much for responding so quickly to that request and making such a meaningful statement.
No problem. I did it on the fly, and I know that it's an important issue, and that we all need to work together no matter where we are in the world. And it's because we all have the same issue, and we just need to work together and to amplify our voices, and get our governments in making good decisions on our behalfs. Yeah. Like they should be.
Like they should.
Yeah, it's completely insane. They're supposed to be working for us, and this is what we're saying. So yeah, thank you. Thank you guys. I think we did a very good podcast first episode, even though we did not go on time, and it's already 9:30. So now we're going to transition into just our announcements, and I'll just say thank you to you guys for coming.
Thank you, Makasa, for having us, and good to see you, Rod.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so now we have a few announcements to make. We are going to be having a TikTok contest for our upcoming weeks, and that's going to be just you sending in your stories to the Ohneganos project and making it a TikTok, and it's going to be due in 2 weeks from now. So let us know if you have any TikToks that you want to send in to us, and we can and you have prizes to win, and we're going to play a video. So yeah, that's our information. Just send it to our Ohneganos Facebook page, or any of our accounts if you can't get a hold of one. And there's 3 prizes that you can win. First is $200, second is $100, and the third is $50. So make sure you send in your TikToks about water, and it can be anything about water. So now we're going to be going into our Science Minute, and that is the water testing findings by Charles D. Lannoy.
Okay, I think I'm up next.
That's right, Charles. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
Sure. So this project was tied in with the project you just heard about from Pat's group. And this was mostly run by a team of undergraduate students, and with big help from Makasa Looking Horse, Cody, Denise McQueen, as well as a few other, and everyone that participated in the study, helping us collect water samples from people's wells and taps and cisterns. So the concern here was with the water quality, drinking water quality at Six Nations. Lots of concern around groundwater wells, but also cisterns. So we first wanted to identify what contaminants were there, quantify what those contaminants were, and then start to identify where the source of that contamination could be coming from. We were doing a heavy metals analysis, which complemented Pat's E. coli and total coliform analyses. We analyzed a whole large suite of different heavy metals: mercury, lead, chromium, arsenic, uranium, etc. And so a total of 26 elements that were analyzed, and we sampled 127 total samples, which came from approximately 85 different sources, different households, because some households had both cisterns and wells. So the sample is a little bit larger than what Pat sampled, but of the 72 samples that Pat showed, we also have those 72 samples in addition to 13 additional households. And while Pat only analyzed tap water, we analyzed tap water, cistern water, and well water. That means water coming directly from those sources. So that's the discrepancy between the numbers of sources between my and Pat's study. The major outcome was the identification of total mercury in 40 of the 127 samples. So quite a large proportion. Here you can see a representative distribution of those samples in red, which had above Canadian guideline standards, which is 1 microgram per liter. The highest concentration we analyzed was 8 micrograms per liter, which is substantially higher than the Canadian guideline. And many samples, which are in yellow, were on the verge of that guideline, so 0.75 to 1 microgram per liter. So still a concerning level. If you divide out those mercury source, those wells or cisterns that had mercury by cistern source or well source, or by measurements of taps that were connected to cisterns or measurement of taps that were connected to wells, there is no clear discrimination between wells and cisterns. This means that both wells and cisterns contained mercury in varying proportions, and simply and the difference between the source, so if your water is coming from a cistern, and the tap where that water is coming out of, has no significant impact, it would seem.
Charles, what are the different colors?
Sorry, I should have indicated that. Green is well below guideline, yellow is near guideline, and red is above guideline. So what we can see is that in the case where you have taps that are connected to cisterns, some of the mercury might be absorbing to the pipes that connect your cistern to your tap. So that's why you have more contamination from the cistern and less contamination in the tap. But for some reason, we don't see such a clear trend between wells and taps. Not exactly sure why. Could be different differences in piping. Could be that wells are older, and so the piping is less able to absorb mercury. Difficult to figure out why there's the difference between cistern taps connected to cisterns and taps connected to wells. If you just look at the mercury distribution around the mean, we have quite a wide spread of different concentrations of mercury, but quite a large clustering around that mean concentration, which is our about 11 sources had that mean concentration. And if we look at the mercury that was found in different types of wells, whether they were dug or drilled, the error bars are large. We don't see any difference between, we can't really identify that mercury is only coming from dug or only coming from drilled wells. So what this indicates to us is that, and what we've learned is that people use their wells and their cisterns in a variety of different ways. Some people fill their cisterns with water from their wells. Some people fill their cisterns with water from trucked in water or from water from the water treatment plant. Some wells are running dry, and so it's likely that they're not tapping groundwater properly. So with all these, and some people are using rainwater from rainwater barrels or rainwater coming off their roofs to fill cisterns and wells. So with this variety of different sources of water, it's very difficult to identify where mercury could be coming from. But one thing you can do is try to identify if the water that's in your well is groundwater or not. Before I get there, we sort of have to look at the macroscopic system here. So if you look at the Grand River, it flows from north to south into Lake Erie. And as it does so, it passes by a lot of industrialized cities, both historically and currently industrialized cities. So Waterloo, Kitchener, Cambridge, Brantford. Guelph actually is not on the Grand River, but it does connect to it. And all those green circles you see are wastewater treatment plants along the Grand River. So pouring their wastewater effluents into the Grand River. And in addition to these outlays, or these effluents coming into the Grand River, as Pat mentioned, the area around Six Nations is very agricultural as well, and so you have lots of water coming from farms entering smaller creeks, such as the Boston and the Mackenzie. So Six Nations is really at the tail end of a lot of this flow, and so it's likely that a lot of the heavy metal contamination could be coming from either industrial or agricultural sources. If you overlay the Haldimand Tract, it actually follows the entire length of the Grand River. So it's just interesting to see that Six Nations only has a small piece of the Haldimand Tract now, where once they controlled the entire length of the river. And by segregating them down to the lower end of that river, it's probably a nice example of environmental racism, in that lots of dumping was occurring in the Grand River and flowing down close to and past and through the Six Nations Reserve, a river that was once used actively by the First Nations population of this area and is now primarily not used by them, and is dominated by industrial activity. So some possible sources of mercury could be coming from septic systems. So if your septic system is too close to your well, there could be contamination, especially if there's cracks or gaps in your well. Mercury could be coming from the creeks or the rivers, or could be coming from direct agricultural runoff or surface runoff that could enter a cracked or broken well. So hard to identify where all this contamination could be coming from. One way to do this is to use artificial sugars. Artificial sugars are used predominantly they're used in large quantities, but predominantly in the food industry. And they are not metabolized in your body. They run right through you, and so they end up in measurable quantities in wastewater treatment plants. So you can measure the concentration of these artificial sugars in the effluents of wastewater treatment plants. And if you find artificial sugars in people's wells or cisterns, that suggests that that water is a surface water, either treated or untreated, but it's a surface water, and unlikely to be a pristine groundwater. So we did a preliminary analysis. This is really preliminary data, but we found a whole variety of artificial sugars in people's wells and cisterns in the subset of samples that we did. So it's likely that lots of wells and cisterns are being filled with surface waters, and that is corroborated by discussions with people on the reserve, who in fact told us, yes, we do refill our wells or our cisterns with water that's coming from a variety of sources. And by visual inspection of a lot of these cisterns and wells, it's clear that a lot of the tops are broken or cracked, or the casings themselves were not built properly. And so there could be lots of infiltration from surface water carrying these artificial sugars to their wells or cisterns. Unfortunately, there's no direct correlation between the identification or the concentration of sweeteners and the heavy metals. So it's not possible to identify the source of the mercury using those artificial sugars, but we can say that a lot of these wells and cisterns are containing surface waters because of their artificial sugar concentrations. So some of the major limitations was that it is quite time consuming to collect large statistical numbers of samples. I had a relatively small part of this whole grant here. So I was mostly running on working with undergraduates, and working with undergraduates means they're only around for 4 or 6 months. So it was stitching together multiple different undergraduate reports together. And it'd be nice to have, instead of single data points per household, have more continuous analysis so that you could see how various contaminants were changing over the course of months or weeks or days even. So we'd like to build continuous capacity on the reserve, and we're starting to do that through a water collection on the reserve, where we have volunteers going around house to house and picking up people's water, storing them on the reserve, and then we can come by and collect in one large collection. And that will hopefully increase our ability to analyze people's water. Further, we would like to build and install sensors in people's wells to continuously monitor water quality. And in conclusion, we found mercury, chromium, arsenic. One sample had uranium, but that's, I think, an outlier. We haven't been able to confirm that by going back to the same house. But primarily mercury was the metal of concern. We found lots of artificial sugars in the preliminary analysis. The artificial sugars are a promising technique to identify whether surface waters are entering into drinking water, but we're not able to discretize between where the heavy metals could be coming from. And the source of mercury is still not identified, but we're not quite sure if it's useful to identify where the source of mercury is at this point, because there are so many varieties of usages of people's cisterns and wells. So the further research is to attempt to either identify the source of contamination, create a fingerprint for possible contamination sources, identify if there is a relationship between heavy metals and sweeteners by carrying out our sweetener analysis on the full set instead of a small subset, and inform community about well maintenance, how wells can get contaminated, and where possible sources of contamination could come from, so that people can maintain their wells more thoroughly. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to take questions.
Charles, what would happen if you found these results off reserve and you reported it to the, municipality? What would be the protocol?
Yeah, so likely finding these kinds of levels of mercury would be a no drink advisory for those wells. You can't boil away mercury. So you can't be put on a boil water advisory like you can for E. coli or coliforms. And even boiling in some instances does not entirely get rid of pathogens that could be resistant to high temperatures. But mercury for sure you can't boil away. So this would be, if we continue to find, unfortunately this is a single data set. We weren't able to go and collect multiple data sets from the same wells. If we consistently see those mercury concentrations, frankly the wells should be shut down. They should not be used.
So
this would be a real call to arms to either build proper wells which actually tap the groundwater, or to connect to the drinking water treatment plant if that's what people want.
Yeah, so I'm just wanting to double down on it's kind of like a red flag moment, and the community should be responding. The services, be it whatever services, whether it's health or elected or whoever, like that's like it's really bad.
It is really bad. And
yeah.
127 sources of water, and 40 of them contain mercury.
It's like almost half.
Yeah, it's a third of sources, and it's that's really high, to say the least.
Yeah.
And I think this is the first time that mercury's been analyzed. In previous analyses, it was primarily nutrients and bacterial indicators. So we don't know how long this mercury's been around. but you can probably assume it's been around for decades because a lot of these wells have not been changed in decades.
Yeah. So that's like public education. We need people to understand, but that's the research team can't do that. We can give the results back to the community, and then it's up to departments and services to meet about it and hopefully develop a plan, because, if you're developing for COVID, you should be developing plans for mercury, because that's really bad. High levels of mercury, not just minute levels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That has some interesting insights here. Rod, do you want to address these? Rod, are you there? Okay. Well, can I say them, because I'm not sure if everyone's reading the message here.
Hi, Charles. It's Kelly Gordon. I just had a comment and a question just to further on Don's comment in your presentation. So I work with Six Nations Health Services with health promotions, and we'll be supporting the community educators who will be supporting the second collection for this project and study. And so question around, we're very tentative as we move into the collection phase, because as people are going to be asking questions, as these results are coming out, those first sets of households that have the mercury contamination, what are they being told? Like, kind of furthering on what Don asked, are they being told it's not advisable to drink this water? Like, are you guys, like, as it was just said, like, is this not the responsibility of the research team and now the responsibility of health or other services within the community to then provide information on then what do we do? How do we, like, for community is we're trying to get people to engage, and then they say, well, what happens if you find mercury? And we're like, well, we're still, like, we don't have an answer to that yet. And knowing that you found this much contamination of heavy metals in the first round is scary. And so just wondering, what are you telling the community members who participated thus far, those that have higher than recommended a level of mercury in their water? And I guess just ideas on proceedings.
Yeah, so we did send out letters indicating to all those people that had high bacterial counts and high mercury what their results were. We could be more forceful and say, you really shouldn't be drinking this water. There's an anthropological study, a whole survey about how people are using that water. And a lot of people on reserve know that their water is contaminated in a variety of ways. And most people, if I remember correctly from the survey, don't actually drink their water directly, but they still use it for washing or for washing dishes, for washing fruits and vegetables. So we would strongly recommend not to be doing that. We can send out a further letter, but I really don't think that, it's one thing to stop the usage of your water, but then where to get your water otherwise?
Yeah.
So if you get a truck delivery and we've identified that your cistern is contaminated, where do you put your water? You'd have to build a new cistern.
Yeah, I think that's why we're trying to have this meeting, Kelly, is we've been trying to meet with the leadership, all the leadership in the community, to give them results. But the reality is that there's no protocol. Six Nations does not have like, oh, here, go to the environment office, and that's what they're like. I hope, like, Mark has committed to setting that up, but essentially the infrastructure doesn't exist in the community to deal with that. And it's really not the research team. These are things we do 10% of our time outside of our regular job. So we don't have an infrastructure. We're just researchers who give the results to the right parties and then encourage them to address the issue. But it is a problem. There is not a strong, and the council has recognized, there's not a strong environmental office here or a group that should work together, because they really need to educate the people drinking and washing their food and making coffee. So we had to do a second survey that Tina will address to say, well, how are they using it? They're not drinking it, but I bet they're still using it. And when we did the second survey, a smaller one, we did find out that they are consuming it, and it should be not even like touching it. They shouldn't even be coming in contact with mercury because it'll be absorbed through the skin. So it's about community education, awareness, and motivating all the different services to come together and address what is a crisis. And it's not just this, it was the E. coli levels as well that were just as bad. So we don't know who to take it to. You know, that's the issue.
So Kelly, I apologize for not putting you at the end of the presentation, but Kelly's been doing a great job of helping us sample through her volunteers in health services. And one of the issues was COVID actually prevented us from going and resampling those households, which we did identify had mercury. You really want to do 2 samples if that's, or maybe 3 samples if that's true, to confirm whether your mercury measurements are accurate. And it could be a strange spike for some reason. Could be that, as Rod mentioned, there was illegal dumping one day, or some unusual event occurred near your well. It's really important to get that resampling. So Kelly and Kelly's team are integral in allowing us to collect more water sources from those people's homes that were identified to be contaminated and confirm our mercury results. So I would say, it's a balance. I'm not a governance expert or politician, but there is a balance between causing undue alarm with preliminary results, but also encouraging significant caution where we found significant contamination. And so that's why we thought those letters would help people recognize that they have contamination, minimize the usage of the water that's coming from that source, but then resampling to confirm that contamination, and then try to identify what are possible solutions. Frankly, because people are using water in so many different ways, or using their wells and cisterns in so many different ways, wells that are cracked, or wells that are too close to septic systems, or wells that have surface water intrusion, or wells that are actually purposely filled with rainwater coming off their roofs. Because there are so many different sources, it's hard to give a single solution to all the people that have contamination. Much more likely, it's going to be a individualized solution. And the simpler, broader scale approach would be to have those people connected to the water treatment plant, or to have them build a new well. Both of those are expensive options. But at what expense are you willing to spend in order to keep the population healthy and safe? So that's why, to Don's point, there really needs to be a strong environmental committee that comes up with these types of solutions.
Thanks, Charles. And I think Rod Whitlow had a comment about giving the community the information, if we can. So that's just put that out there. Not supposed to hold back. Scientists want to hold back, but results are results, and the community needs to be aware.
Thank you, everybody, for watching, and that is our wrap up for episode 1 of season 2 of Ohneganos at the Top Water. And I'm your host, Makasa, and I'll see you next week. Ona.